The bakery was quiet. The little girl lifted her cup, then lowered it. "Mama," she said calmly, repeating a sentence she had heard before. Her mother stopped moving. Somewhere behind them, a spoon touched porcelain gently. And without lifting his head, a man looked up and listened. Before we continue, click on the subscribe button. Elena Tritenko stood on the black and white tiles and counted the cracks, because counting made the waiting shorter. The bakery was warm, louder than it looked, filled with the quiet noises adults didn't notice anymore: paper bags folding, cups touching saucers, the low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Her feet didn't reach the floor from the chair. They swung once, then again. Oksana Tritenko kept her eyes on the glass case, as if the answer to everything might be written on the labels beneath the pastries. She had chosen nothing. She had chosen standing still. The line moved forward and she moved with it, one small step at a time, careful not to draw attention, careful not to rush. Elena felt the tension before she understood it. Her mother's hand rested on her shoulder, light but firm, the way it did when they crossed busy streets or passed loud men on the stairs. It was the same hand now. Elena accepted it without question. She looked around. There were the regulars, the old couple by the window who shared one coffee, the woman near the door who checked her phone as if waiting for a message that never arrived, two men talking about work in voices meant to sound casual. And then there was the man sitting alone, 2 tables away. Elena noticed him because he didn't belong to any of the small movements happening around him. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't watching anyone. His posture was upright without effort, as if chairs had been designed specifically for him. His coffee sat untouched. Oksana felt Elena shift beside her. "Just a moment," she said softly, not turning. Elena nodded. She waited. She remembered the sentence because it had been said more than once, always late, always after the door closed. It had never sounded like a secret. It had sounded like something adults accepted and moved around. When Elena spoke, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't whisper either. She simply said the sentence the way she had heard it, clear and complete. The bakery did not react. That was what made Oksana's stomach drop. She didn't turn toward Elena. She didn't correct her. The words pressed into her chest and stayed there. Oksana's mind searched for explanations, for ways to soften what had been said, but none arrived. Her body knew faster than her thoughts did. Across the room, the man's spoon stopped halfway to the cup. It wasn't dramatic, it was precise. The pause lasted just long enough to matter. Oksana sensed it without seeing it. She felt the room tilt, felt the certainty settle in that something had been set in motion without her permission. She reached for her bag, fingers brushing the zipper, grounding herself in the familiar. "Finish your drink," she said to Elena, voice steady by force. Elena obeyed, confused but compliant. Behind them, the spoon touched the saucer without a sound. Oksana stood. As she did, she understood something she hadn't allowed herself to think before. Whatever Elena had repeated did not belong to them anymore. And whoever had heard it first had not missed a word. The door was still open. Oksana did not rush for the door. Rushing would have meant panic, and panic invited attention. She gathered their empty cups, placed them on the counter where they belonged, and thanked the woman behind the register with a voice that sounded almost like her own. Elena watched her closely. "Mama." "In a minute," Oksana said again. The words had become a habit, a small shield. She reached for Elena's coat and helped her into it, smoothing the fabric longer than necessary, giving her hands something to do. The man at the table remained seated. He had lifted his cup now. He drank slowly, eyes lowered, as if the moment had already passed. That, more than anything else, unsettled Oksana. If he had stared, if he had reacted, she could have measured the danger. Indifference was harder to read. They stepped outside. Cold air rushed over Oksana's face, sharp and grounding. The street was busy in the way cities always were, cars idling at the light, a bus exhaling, people moving past each other with practiced avoidance. Life continued. It always did. Elena slipped her hand into her mother's coat pocket, fingers finding the familiar edge of a folded receipt. "Did I say it wrong?" she asked quietly. Oksana shook her head without looking down. "No, you didn't say anything wrong." The truth was heavier. Elena had said it exactly right. They walked toward their building, Oksana keeping her pace steady. She listened to the rhythm of footsteps behind them, counting unconsciously. None matched theirs. She did not turn around. At the corner, Elena slowed. "Mama," he said. Later, Oksana cut in, sharper than she meant to. She softened it immediately. "We'll talk later." They reached the entrance. Oksana unlocked the door, ushered Elena inside, and closed it behind them with a controlled click. The hallway smelled of cleaning solution and old paint. It was familiar. It was supposed to be safe. They climbed the stairs. Inside the apartment, Oksana locked the door and leaned her forehead against it. She listened. Nothing followed them. No voices, no footsteps. The silence stretched. Elena set her shoes by the wall. "Is he coming?" she asked, not frightened, just curious. Oksana turned slowly. "Who?" "The man Mama doesn't like." Oksana knelt in front of her daughter. She took Elena's face gently in her hands. "Listen to me," she said, carefully choosing each word. "You don't repeat that sentence again, not to anyone, not ever." Elena nodded, sensing the seriousness at last. "Okay." Oksana stood and crossed the room. She checked the windows. She checked her phone. No missed calls, no messages. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. Across the city, Viktor Sokolov stepped out of the bakery and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the noise pass around him. He did not follow the woman and the child. He did not need to. He took out his phone. He did not dial immediately. When he did, the call connected on the first ring. "Find out who lives there," Victor said calmly, "and don't let him know yet." He ended the call before the reply finished. Back in the apartment, Oksana sat beside Elena on the couch and held her close, listening to the building settle around them. Somewhere else, someone's routine had just been marked for review, and they were not aware of it yet. Viktor Sokolov did not return home after the call. He drove without urgency, letting the traffic decide his speed, his phone resting face down on the passenger seat. He did not need updates yet. Information, when rushed, arrived distorted. He preferred it clean. He parked 2 streets away from the bakery and walked the rest of the distance, not because he needed to, but because walking allowed him to think. The girl's voice replayed in his mind, not the words themselves, but the way they had been delivered. No fear, no hesitation. Children who lied searched for approval. This one hadn't. He stopped in front of a quiet storefront and looked through the glass without really seeing what was inside. His reflection stared back at him, calm, unremarkable. That was how authority survived longest. The phone vibrated once. Victor picked it up. "They live in the building on 10th, the voice said. "Second floor, the woman works nights sometimes, cleaning." "Who else?" Victor asked. "There's a man," the voice replied after a pause. "Not registered there, come and go, careful, keeps his car 2 blocks away." Victor absorbed that without reaction. "Does he know?" "No." "Good," Victor said. "Leave it that way." He ended the call and remained where he was, letting the information settle into place. Somewhere in the city, a man believed he had mastered caution. Victor respected that. It made what came next simpler. In the apartment, Oksana sat at the small kitchen table long after Elena had gone to sleep. The girl's door was closed, a thin line of light still visible underneath. Oksana kept her phone beside her, screen dark, waiting for something to announce itself. Nothing did. She replayed the day in fragments. The bakery, the sentence, the man's stillness. She had not seen his face clearly, but she remembered the certainty of his presence. It was the kind of certainty that didn't demand attention. She stood and checked the lock again. It was held. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Across the city, the man who did not live in the apartment finished his evening routine. He washed his hands carefully, dried them, and checked the window before turning off the light. He felt watched for a moment, an old instinct, but dismissed it. No one had followed him. No one ever did. He lay down and closed his eyes. At the same time, Viktor Sokolov wrote a name on a small piece of paper and placed it inside his wallet. He did not look at it again. The act of writing was enough. By morning, the city would still look the same. Streets would open, shops would unlock, people would move through their habits without interruption. But one routine had already been identified. And identification, Viktor knew, was the first step that never announced itself. He switched off the engine and stepped out of the car. The next move would not belong to him alone. Viktor Sokolov did not sleep that night. He rested, which was different. Rest allowed the mind to remain alert while the body slowed enough to listen. Sleep invited dreams. Viktor avoided those. At dawn, he stood by the window of his apartment and watched the city wake itself without instruction. Lights flickered on in offices. A delivery truck idled too long at the corner. Somewhere, a siren cut through the quiet and disappeared just as quickly. Order resumed. It always did. He made 2 calls. The first was to a man named Sergei Malenkov, whose job was not to ask why something mattered, only whether it did. Sergei answered immediately. "I need confirmation," Viktor said. "No movement yet." "Understood," Sergei replied. "Do you want him to be aware?" "Not yet." The second call was shorter. Viktor spoke to a woman named Irina Volkova, who handled things that did not leave records. "A child was present," Viktor said. "I want distance." There was a pause on the line. "Distance can be arranged," Irina said carefully. "Yes," Viktor replied, "from everyone else." He ended the call and closed the curtains. Across the city, Oksana Atritenko woke before her alarm. The apartment felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that made sounds echo in the mind before they happened. She lay still, listening for footsteps in the hallway, for the building's familiar groans. Nothing came. She dressed Elena for school with practiced calm. The girl sensed something in her mother's movements, slower, more deliberate, but asked no questions. Children learned quickly when questions were unwelcome. At the door, Oksana hesitated. She considered keeping Elena home. She considered running. She considered things she had learned never to attempt. Instead, she opened the door. The hallway was empty. Outside, life continued to pretend nothing had shifted. Elena walked beside her, talking about a class project, unaware that the world around her was now paying attention in a way it hadn't before. 2 blocks away, a man sat in his car and waited. He was not watching Oksana or Elena. He was watching the building behind them, counting exits, measuring patterns. He made no move. That, too, was deliberate. By mid-morning, the man who believed himself invisible noticed the first irregularity. A call that should have been returned wasn't. A door that usually opened after one knock remained closed. These were small things. They could be explained. He chose to explain them. He should not have. Viktor Sokolov received confirmation just after noon. Sergei's message was brief, confirmed. He's nervous, still unaware. Viktor read it once and deleted it. Control did not require action yet. It required patience, the kind that allowed mistakes to surface on their own. He poured himself another cup of coffee and sat down. Elsewhere, a man began adjusting his routine, unaware that every adjustment was being noted. And somewhere between those 2 realities, the balance finished shifting. No one had been touched. But nothing was the same anymore. By evening, the waiting had become heavier than fear. Oksana felt it in the way time stretched inside the apartment, in how every sound arrived a second earlier than expected. The refrigerator clicked on, pipes knocked softly, the building settled around them like it always had. Normal sounds, wrong wait. Elena sat on the floor coloring, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. She had chosen blue for the sky and red for the house, reversing them without noticing. Oksana watched her longer than necessary, memorizing details she had never thought to memorize before. The small scar above Elena's eyebrow, the way she pressed too hard with the pencil when she was unsure. Oksana checked her phone again, still nothing. She told herself that silence meant safety. She told herself that nothing had followed them home. She told herself many things that sounded reasonable until they were said too often. Outside, the streetlights came on. Somewhere else in the city, Sergei Malenkov sat in a parked car and watched a man walk out of a grocery store carrying a single plastic bag. Sergei did not follow closely. He didn't need to. The man's routine was already mapped. Tonight wasn't about movement, it was about confirmation. The man stopped at a crosswalk and checked his phone. Sergei noted the gesture, the impatience in it, a sign. Back in the apartment, Elena looked up from her drawing. Mama, are we in trouble? The question landed softly. Elena wasn't scared, she was perceptive. Oksana crouched beside her. No, she said, it was not a lie. Trouble had not arrived yet. Trouble announced itself. This was something else. Then why are you holding your phone like that? Elena asked. Oksana realized her hand was clenched around it. She loosened her grip and forced a smile, just waiting for a call. From who? Oksana paused. From work. Elena accepted that. Children accepted many things when answers sounded confident. At the same time, Viktor Sokolov sat in a quiet restaurant across town, untouched by the plate in front of him. He listened as Irina Volkova spoke in low, careful sentences. He's adjusting, Irina said. Small changes. He feels pressure but doesn't know where it's coming from. Good, Viktor replied. And the woman, Irina asked. Protected, Viktor said, without her knowing. Irina nodded once, then we wait. Yes, Viktor agreed, now we wait. Waiting was not inaction, it was structured. Later that night, the man returned to his apartment and locked the door behind him. He leaned against it, breathing out slowly. He told himself the feeling would pass. It always had before. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it longer than necessary before answering. Hello. There was no voice on the other end. The call ended. In Oksana's apartment, Elena had fallen asleep on the couch, her drawing abandoned on the floor. Oksana covered her with a blanket and stood alone in the darkened room, listening to the city breathe. She did not know what decision had been made. Only that it had. And that normal life, the kind that returned after a scare, was no longer an option. Something irreversible had begun to take shape. Morning arrived without announcement. No sirens, no knocks, no explanations. The city resumed its patterns as if nothing had shifted beneath them. Oksana woke with the certainty that something had already happened elsewhere. She moved quietly through the apartment, careful not to wake Elena. The girl slept deeply, one arm thrown over her face, breath steady. Oksana watched her for a long moment, then turned away. Watching too long felt like inviting goodbye. In the kitchen, Oksana made tea she did not drink. The steam fogged the window, blurring the street below into soft shapes. She considered her options. There were very few. She could go to the police. She dismissed that almost immediately. Explanations required names. Names created records. Records survived longer than people. She could run, but running required preparation, money, certainty about where to go, and it required time. Time, she suspected, was no longer hers. Her phone vibrated once on the table. Oksana froze. A message, no number, no name. You don't know who you spoke near yesterday. You should be careful who hears you next. Her first instinct was anger, her second was fear, her third was clarity. This was not a threat. Threats demanded compliance. This was information. She deleted the message without replying. In another part of the city, The man who believed himself invisible paced his apartment. He had not slept. The silence from the previous night had grown teeth. He replayed the unanswered call, the empty line, the way his name had not been spoken. He considered leaving the city. He considered reaching out to people who owed him favors. He stopped himself. Reaching out meant exposing himself. Instead, he opened a drawer and removed an envelope he had kept hidden for years. Inside were documents, photographs, and proof, leverage he had never needed until now. He stared at it, weighing its cost. Across town, Viktor Sokolov listened as Sergei spoke quietly. "He's thinking about insurance," Sergei said, "old habits." Viktor nodded, then he understands something is wrong. "Do you want it stopped?" Sergei asked. Viktor shook his head. "No, pressure clarifies choices." At school, Elena sat at her desk and traced letters she already knew. She looked at the clock too often. She did not know why she felt uneasy, only that the feeling had followed her from the bakery, through sleep, into daylight. When school ended, Oksana was waiting. They walked home together in silence. At the building entrance, Oksana paused. She looked down at Elena and made a decision she had avoided since the bakery. "Listen to me," she said softly. "If anyone ever asks you about that sentence, you don't answer, you come to me." Elena nodded. "Okay." That was the choice. Across the city, Viktor Sokolov closed his notebook and stood. Some choices created safety. Others revealed who had already lost it. And someone was about to choose wrong. The man decided not to run. Running was what people did when they believed there was still space ahead of them. He had lived long enough to recognize when space was already gone. He dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made him blend rather than stand out. He left his apartment at an hour that was neither early nor late, the kind of hour meant to look unremarkable. The hallway was empty. The street outside was busy. That was reassuring, briefly. He walked 3 blocks before he felt it, the sense of being expected. Not followed, not watched. Expected. He stopped at a cafe he had never entered before and ordered coffee he did not want. He chose a table near the window. He told himself this was caution, not panic. Across the street, Sergei Malenkov adjusted his position slightly, just enough to keep the man within sight. Sergei had been doing this for years. He knew when someone had reached the point where decisions became mistakes. The man's phone buzzed again. This time there was a message. "We should talk." No name, no number. He stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Then he typed a response he erased twice before sending. "About what?" The reply came quickly. "You know." He closed his eyes. In Oksana's apartment, the evening routine unfolded with exaggerated normalcy. Dinner, homework, a cartoon Elena had already seen twice. Oksana laughed in the right places. She answered questions she did not hear. Elena noticed anyway. "Mama," she said quietly, "are we going to move?" Oksana hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. "I don't know yet," she said. Elena nodded, absorbing it with the seriousness children reserved for truths they could not change. Elsewhere, Viktor Sokolov stood in a parking garage beneath a building that housed offices, no one connected to him. He listened to Sergei's update without interruption. "He's responding," Sergei said, slowly, carefully. "As he should," Viktor replied. "And the woman?" Sergei asked. Viktor's answer was immediate. "She's not the cost." Sergei understood that distinction. Costs were paid by those who created them. The man agreed to meet. He chose the location himself, believing that choice still mattered. A neutral place, public enough to feel safe, private enough to talk. Viktor approved it without comment. As night settled over the city, movements aligned. Cars took routes that intersected without appearing to. Doors opened for people who had not knocked yet. In the apartment, Oksana checked the lock one last time before turning off the light. She stood in the dark for a moment, listening to Elena's breathing from the next room. She did not know whose decision would arrive first, only that when it did, it would not ask for permission. And the city prepared itself for a consequence that would not make noise. The meeting was scheduled for the following evening. That alone told Viktor Sokolov everything he needed to know. Men who believed they still had leverage chose sooner. Men who delayed were trying to measure how much time remained. Viktor allowed the delay. Time revealed character more reliably than pressure. He arrived early, as he always did. The place was unremarkable, too ordinary to attract attention, too open to conceal intent. Viktor chose a table that gave him sight of both entrances without facing either directly. He ordered nothing. He waited. Across the city, Oksana Atritenko stood at the kitchen sink and watched darkness settle against the window. Elena sat at the table doing homework, erasing the same line over and over until the paper thinned. Oksana wanted to tell her to stop, to reassure her, to say something that would close the distance that had formed between yesterday and now. She said nothing. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket. She did not check it. Some messages were better left unread until they demanded attention. At the meeting place, the man arrived 5 minutes late. That was a mistake. He scanned the room before spotting Viktor, then froze briefly, just long enough to confirm what he had suspected. He approached the table slowly, carefully, as if sudden movement might provoke something unseen. "Mr. Sokolov," he said. Viktor did not correct him. "You know why I'm here," the man continued, attempting calm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Viktor listened without interruption. That was the most dangerous thing he could have done. The man spoke for several minutes. He explained. He was justified. He minimized. He avoided the one thing Viktor was waiting for. Finally, he stopped. Viktor leaned back slightly. He did not raise his voice. "The child wasn't asking," Viktor said. "She was reporting." The man swallowed. "I didn't hurt her," he said quickly. "That wasn't the sentence," Viktor replied. Silence filled the space between them, the kind of silence that did not invite response. In the apartment, Elena closed her notebook and looked toward her mother. "Is it over?" she asked. Oksana did not answer. At the table, Viktor stood. He did not threaten the man. He did not touch him. He did not even finish the conversation. Instead, he placed a card on the table. "You will wait," Viktor said calmly, "and you will not leave the city." "What happens if I do?" the man asked, his voice barely steady. Viktor paused. "You already know," he said. He turned and walked away. The man remained seated, staring at the card, understanding finally settling into something like panic. Across the city, Oksana's phone vibrated again. This time she looked. A single message appeared. "He has been told." She locked the phone and stood in the darkened kitchen, listening to Elena's breathing from the next room. Nothing had ended. Something had been said. And whatever came next would not begin with a sound, only with the absence of interruption. The man did not leave the city. He told himself it was a choice, but choices required options, and he had narrowed to patience or panic. Panic revealed people. Patience bought time. He stayed where he was told to stay, answering calls he did not recognize, missing calls he was meant to miss. Each hour confirmed the same truth. Nothing more needed to be said to him. Viktor Sokolov never contacted him again. That was the consequence. When the order finally moved, it did so quietly. Access was revoked without explanation. Doors that once opened did not. Names that once answered went silent. The man discovered that power did not need to destroy him to remove him. It only needed to step aside and let the absence do its work. He understood too late that the child had not accused him. She had located him. Oksana Tritenko felt the shift before she saw any proof of it. The pressure that had lived in her chest loosened, not into relief, but into something colder, certainty. No one knocked on her door, no one called her phone. Life resumed, but differently, as if an unseen weight had been lifted without permission or explanation. She never asked who the man in the bakery was. She never wanted the answer. Elena remembered the sentence, but not the fear. Children rarely carried the full weight of what adults placed around them. She returned to school, to routine, to a world that felt safer without understanding why. That was intentional. Viktor Sokolov closed his notebook and did not reopen it. What needed to be handled had been handled. There was no satisfaction in it, only balance restored. He did not think of the man again. He did not need to. Power was never about reaction. It was about recognition. And once recognized, it moved on. Power doesn't announce itself when it's finished. It simply leaves fewer options behind. Somewhere in the city, a routine was erased without explanation. Elsewhere, a mother slept through the night without knowing why. And a child forgot the sentence, but not the calm that followed it. What mattered was never the moment itself. It was who understood it first. Stories like this don't end loudly. They continue where power is noticed, not explained.